Election 2025 heats up. Tesla banned to ramp up hate on Trump to favor liberals? Question mark. Eleanor Sturko wants Dr. Henry fired. BC's drug decriminalization and safer supply associated with more overdoses. And Bloc says liberals more dangerous than Trump. All that and more on The Really Big Show. Jim Check with Kelowna Now in a socked-in Kelowna here. And Ian Burns on the phone from Ottawa. What's it look like out there in Ottawa today?
It's pretty much the same, actually, though I think it's considerably colder. It's sort of like single digits, low single digits, but very grey, very cloudy.
Any word on your car yet, or still in limbo?
Apparently, the mechanic that's supposed to fix it is had a family emergency or some kind of emergency or something, and he's given his responsibilities to another mechanic. So it drags on. The mystery drags on.
So not only is this the Really Big Show about news across Canada, we have the reality show of what's happening with Ian's car.
Or just my life, really, as well.
There you go. So Ian's car still in limbo. It's a Kia, isn't it?
Yep, Kia Sorento. I would not recommend.
Well, if you want us to recommend a Kia, maybe replace Ian's Kia there, and then
then we'll be your biggest fan.
There you go. We will do like some of the other organizations. We'll definitely be biased towards you, but right now, not so good. We'll start in BC though. In British Columbia, BC to bring to an end the legislation to end the carbon tax on consumers starting April 1. David Eby doesn't look very happy there though. But yeah, so that's
well, he's not happy. Yeah, he's very reluctant to do this, isn't he?
Yeah, he made a promise, and he's like, that's a tough one to break. He did break the $1,000 promise, but this one he's going to have a real tough time breaking, especially when it goes away for Canada. And BC left with a big hole in its budget. I thought all that money was supposed to go back to the consumer, but obviously it doesn't, because now all of a sudden it's a hole. There you go.
Certainly the BC one, because it's a separate system, isn't it? That one, yeah, it's basically revenue raising. Yeah, there's a little sort of program to get it back to people, but as is often the case in British Columbia, to qualify, you have to be like some sort of magical combination of things that really nobody is.
And then they take a lot and then just sprinkle a few crumbs back and then step to the podium and tell you about how you should be grateful for the crumbs. There you go.
But yeah, it's interesting you say he promised it and he can't renege on it, because I mean he's already been accused of reneging on in particular because if you cast your mind back a few months, it was all about public safety, wasn't it? That seems to have gone out the window now since Trump decided to do the things that he's done. But it was all about public safety. It was about crime. It was about homelessness. It was about addictions and all sorts of things like that. And he promised a real program to make people feel safer. That was his priority. And yet that seems to have vanished really as a talking point. And he was accused recently of watering down his, forcing people to go into mental health facilities to be treated. So, I mean, usually that means sort of homeless people who are addicted to drugs. That's kind of, and it has kind of been watered down if you look at it. But when you say something as simple as, I will abolish the carbon tax if the feds do that, you can't water that down, can you? I mean, you either abolish it or you don't. So in this sense, he's backed into a corner.
Conservative MLA Eleanor Sturko, she's still on fire and she wants Bonnie Henry fired. She says a public inquiry into trafficking of safe supply drugs and firing of provincial Bonnie Henry should happen. Nothing has changed. It's blatantly obvious that the provincial government is going to let this disgrace go unabated. What's more concerning is thousands and thousands of safe supplied pills are being delivered right into the hands of illegal drug traffickers. She's been doing the work. Yeah. Like
and this has been something that the Alberta government has complained about. I mean, I don't know about the Americans, but I'm sure they would. They would jump on this opportunity to complain about this, because these drugs are, they're in pretty big quantities ending up in the hands of criminals.
Yeah, no doubt. And then here, it relates to our next story in British Columbia, BC's drug decriminalization and safer supply associated with more overdoses. So there you go. The reports
who would have thought that, eh? So it turns out that completely random people that you might have stopped in the street a few years ago and said, "What do you think of this? What do you think of this safe supply or drug decriminalization malarkey? What do you reckon of that?" there's a reasonable chance that that person would have said, "Oh, that sounds like a bad idea. It sounds like more people will die from drug overdoses if that happens." And then all the experts, all of the wizards who sit there and judge the plebs for being stupid, turns out they all thought that it was a great idea. The average person thought it was a bad idea, and lo and behold, once again, for what seems like the thousandth time in the last few years, the guy in the street was right, and these so-called experts were colossally wrong, if this study is correct.
Yeah, that full story is on colonanow.com, but the report said there's no change in deaths associated with safer supply, while neither the policy appeared to mitigate the opioid crisis that has claimed more than 16,000 lives in BC since being declared a public health emergency in 2016. Yeah, so there is an increase in opioid hospitalizations, though. So, yeah, go read the full report on colonanow.com.
It's also important, I think, to mention that there's been a decline recently in the last sort of couple of years in opioid deaths in the US and Canada, and people don't really seem to know why. It's they're still studying the reason for that, and a lot of it seems to be that there's been a change in the attitudes of people that use drugs, basically, that they know that fentanyl is lethal. So they're trying different methods to ingest drugs or just trying to avoid fentanyl. I mean, it's a complicated issue, but this is the thing, it's so complicated that you kind of need your experts, so-called, to be really at the top of their game, don't you? And yet, when studies like this come out, it suggests that that's not the case, that they aren't on the ball.
Well, it seems like in all these things, including what we're going to talk about next, that you weren't even allowed to discuss it. It was just like shrieked at you that this is the way to do it, and if you didn't like it, that you were actually killing people, and then so it really stopped debate on these things from different sides of the question.
Yeah, and that's been the case. It's almost like a tyranny of um, people that think that they're morally superior to you. It's like a moral tyranny, isn't it? Where they say, "Oh, you don't want to give people fentanyl or powerful drugs to help them with their addiction. Like you're going to kill these people." It's like, whoa, okay. Like I just thought it was a bad idea. I mean, and yeah, it is right. And it was the same with COVID, which I guess we're going to discuss next here. But it was the same with COVID, where if you had even a tiny bit of suspicion about big pharma, like if you had a little bit of suspicion about Pfizer, the international conglomerate that's been accused of many naughty deeds in its history, then you were like a granny killer, weren't you? And that was the level of rhetoric that we were at a few years ago.
Basically deplatformed, banned, and all kinds of stuff. Any doctors that kind of like spoke out, and we've seen that in British Columbia as well, and fired healthcare workers and all that stuff. And here's a case that was dismissed by the Ontario courts of a claim by a family of an Ontario high school student who died weeks after getting the COVID shot. And the judge says that there's no duty of care to individuals inadvertently harmed by pandemic measures. And the judge dismissed the liability claim by the family, who died weeks after taking that shot, and again saying that there was no duty of care. That the plaintiff's tragedy is real, but there is no private law of duty of care made out, wrote Superior Court Justice Sandra Antoniana. There you go. So,
But there is a separate vaccine injury
yeah,
sort of fund, isn't there?
yeah.
But I guess this is kind of, they don't want to take liability in some kind of legal sense by the looks of things, but I assume that there's some kind of
Yeah,
compensation package on offer.
I think they've paid out about $16 million, and some of that has even been paid out for funeral expenses. But yeah, so he died. Sean Hartman, 17, of Beaton, Ontario, died suddenly 3 weeks after taking the Pfizer biotech vaccine.
But this is again, you're saying back in the day during the hysteria, there were people that said this kind of thing. There were people that posted this kind of thing, quite innocently and just as curious private citizens. They said, look, if something goes wrong with one of these vaccines, like the government has been exempted from responsibility, and so's Pfizer. They're not gonna come and help you. So it's really up to you. People were saying that, and then they were being condemned as conspiracy theorists and like psychopaths that wanted to kill grannies. So again, how interesting that that random person on Facebook who was probably banned and fired for saying that that nobody's going to look after you if you get hurt. That they're not going to take responsibility. Turns out that guy was right too.
And like, and the sad thing is, a lot of the young people were basically forced into taking it as well, because you couldn't go to school, you couldn't do things, and Justin Trudeau said we're going to make it really, really hard for Canadians that refused to take it, called them a bunch of names, and said you couldn't ride on a plane, train, or I mean, there was some really divisive rhetoric that was put out there, and then like basically. They say you had a choice, but it wasn't much of a choice if you wanted to operate in a regular life of any type.
It was
Yeah.
blackmail, wasn't it? That I
Yeah.
mean, basically, that's the simplest way to understand the situation. I think people were blackmailed into taking the vaccines, and I know a lot of people, many of them, what you would call sort of liberals, good liberals, who usually do all the things they're supposed to do, who were still a little bit skeptical about the vaccine, but they took it anyway because they realized that they needed to do that to have a job, to, go somewhere, go to a restaurant or whatever it was. They knew that, and so therefore they took it, and their doubts were forced out of their mind. And then the tragedy, I guess, if you want to say that, in this individual case, would be maybe that was the same with this lad here. Maybe he also had his doubts, but he realized that he had to do it. He was forced into doing it, and then when something went wrong, there was nobody there. The province wasn't there to help him, or the
Yeah.
feds either in this case.
Yeah, so a total of 2,060 claims have been filed for the government vaccine injury support program, and a total of 219 were approved so far, right? Um, and it's 16.6 million has been paid out so far. But how do you replace this young man's life? And like I said, like when people were talking about it, they weren't even allowed to talk about it. There's people that would be shrieking in your face if you dared say anything.
Also, another thing we haven't even mentioned, he was 17 years old. I mean, I don't know if he had any sort of particular illnesses and vulnerabilities or something like that. It doesn't look like it. It's not mentioned in this story. But 17 years old, basically, we might as well say zero chance of complications from COVID. So it was superfluous anyway. He didn't even need that vaccine.
Let's move on to elections 2025. Lots to get through here. Jagmeet Singh, trying to remain relevant, calls Carney a bad landlord. This is the Holly Doan's Blacklock story. And he said, housing is one of Canada's biggest concerns, right? And he's saying that the Prime Minister was a corporate rent gouger who profited from the housing crisis as chair of Brookfield Asset Management. He made millions of dollars as chair of the company in stock options. And Mark Carney oversaw the company as they made strategic decision to go after people in the city of Toronto, squeeze as much profit as possible, said Singh. The new Democratic leader made the remarks after meeting with Brookfield tenants who complained of rent gouging. The Federal Housing Advocate in 2022 report, the financialization of housing in Canada, accused Brookfield of using strategies to charge new fees for utilities and services to raise rents. So yeah, because there's rent controls lots of times, but they just use different things to do it. So in a letter to shareholders, the CEO described housing shortages as our sweet spot. And historically, many of the substantial gains in real estate were made during periods of capital scarcity. So we are confident investors will look to deploy meaningful amounts of capital to opportunist real estate strategies in order to take advantage of the stress in the market, which is our sweet spot. And that's Mark Carney's company, Brookfield Asset Management. And then right now, Jagmeet is still accusing him. He won't disclose how many millions he has still invested in Brookfield, and why would average Canadians trust him to fight the housing crisis when he definitely, even in the letters to shareholders, showed you how they could profit off of the shortage of supply and really maximize returns for shareholders in what they called our sweet spot.
That's a very unfortunate term, isn't it, to be associated with, in effect, homelessness and poverty and misery across the whole country. But for Brookfield, that was a sweet spot. That's I mean, that's horrible, isn't it?
That alone should tell people just like what everything says. That's why he likely doesn't want to disclose what he's got going on there, because that is any company that would say that publicly, like would be especially when housing is one of Canada's toughest things. And here's the Brookfield Asset Management saying like, taking advantage of renters with, like outside fees outside of rent, which are controlled with new fees for utilities and services to raise rents, and calling this scarcity their sweet spot.
I mean, Brookfield, this is like Carney was pressed on something else, the Bermuda thing, which I think we're going to talk about later, aren't we? But he was pressed on something else with Brookfield, which is just like an anvil tied to his neck at the minute, isn't it? But I mean, his response in many ways earlier this morning was, "Oh, that's just how companies like that do. That's just how we do it. That's how they operate." And it's kind of that is true, isn't it? You can't deny that he's right when he says that. But the question then has to be, okay, so why did you work for this company then? Not just work for it, but why were you like at the top table? You were the big
Well,
boy at this
I
company.
would I would say, as the chairman, you would be the guy that's guiding policy and agenda. I mean, that's what your job is: policy and agenda.
Yeah. You can't not be aware
You
that
can't blame
things like this is
somebody.
going on.
You can't blame somebody else for it. And that's a letter to shareholders, which he would have signed likely, right? Do you know what I mean? That's a letter to shareholders
Yeah.
that comes from his desk, right? The same as the one that came from his desk that said, move the headquarters to the United States of America.
Indeed. I mean, it's it's very ugly. And when he decided, whenever that was, that he was going to become the prime minister, because it must have been something along those lines. He must have known that it was a done deal pretty much when he made the decision. But that must have been one of the first things that his advisor said, like, they are going to try and burn you over Brookfield. And so, I mean, he's had plenty of time to prepare, but
I actually
it
think he might.
continues.
I actually think he might have been thinking that the media that was like, because when he said that I love the CBC and all that, that they would have been a little more friendly. But it's a bone that you can't leave there because it is so important. And then this one that Jagmeet brings to light, housing is one of the biggest crises in Canada, and here it is, the company he ran taking advantage of Canadians.
Yep. Well, the other big crisis that you might say is the opioid epidemic, which he referred to as a challenge rather than a crisis. So he managed to get a gaff there as well.
And then let's turn our attention to Chandra Ira, who put out a post here saying that he's been barred, and then they said because of alleged ties to India. And Ruby Dalla
Yeah, and then
also booted.
they alleged that it was due to a meeting, but that meeting was like 2 years ago or something. Why was he only just turfed now? That is the obvious question, isn't it?
Yeah, and then look who shows up, our friend Sean Fraser, to take a spot from another Liberal MP that is already running, or not an MP, a Liberal that was going to run, and elbows up. There you go. That's their thing. And I guess one of the Liberals got the elbow in the face as Sean Fraser decided to take his spot. I did watch the press conference where Mark Carney said, well, I don't know nothing about it if he's going to do it or not, but, like we can't not have somebody of his caliber versus, somebody that's. So they're very much elbows up for everybody.
He said that. Yeah, he said, I don't know what's happening. Like, I really hope he is gonna I really hope that he is gonna declare and come back. And then like a few hours later, he was at a press conference alongside him. So like
Imagine
obviously he
that, eh?
knew.
He's either the most uninformed prime minister, or he doesn't like to share very well. And then this is a picture of the guy that got the boot, Graham Murray. And somebody's saying, hope he didn't spend too much money on his signs. So,
Well, another thing as well, we were talking about how Fraser said that he was resigning because he didn't have a chance to see his children. That was
yeah.
basically what he said. It was quite a kind of heartfelt resignation statement. But justifying his return, he said, Mark Carney has promised me that he's gonna make it so that I can be an MP and a minister and still spend time with my kids. I mean, I don't know I have no idea what that means. Does that mean that he's going to be given a very sort of like an easy, less serious portfolio to manage? Because if he's going to be given a big job,
Um,
then I mean, I'm sorry to say, but if you want to be one of the most important people and powerful people in Canada, you're not going to get much free time. That's kind of how it happens. That's how it works. There's no way around that. That's the reality. of managing an entire country, you know? So
One of our,
I don't know what he's been promised.
one of the comments from one of our viewers there, basically saying the old team is back together, and we're seeing a lot of those, like Marco, many of these people back in the saddle. So, you know, they say it's a different type of liberals, and that the bad liberals are gone. Like, you know, 10 years they blame Justin Trudeau, but it's the same group of people, actually even recruiting some of the people even that Trudeau kicked out, like Marco and Gerald Butts.
And that is also, remember, the team that managed to get the Liberals down to what was the estimate? Like 20 seats or something like that in the polls?
I don't know, man. Like, this is
Dream team.
Dream team. Yeah. So anyway, Mark Carney says he's going to dish $2 billion. Here's the candy man. $2 billion to help the auto sector. And says that they're going to make sure that they're going to create a $2 billion strategic response fund to boost the auto sector's competitiveness, protect manufacturing jobs, build an all-in-Canada network for auto manufacturing, maximize Canada's steel and aluminum critical minerals, leverage government funding to prioritize and procure Canadian-built vehicles. I think somebody should remind him that all the Canadian automakers are American companies. I don't think he realizes that. And that the EV mandate that he doesn't make mention of here will actually kill all auto manufacturing in Canada if they don't kill that EV mandate. It doesn't sound like they're going to do that. So which automobiles are they actually going to give the $2 billion for? Sure isn't Tesla. It sure isn't Tesla.
It's also the case that, yeah, definitely not Tesla. They'll take money off Tesla if they can. Maybe they'll fine you for driving one. But what I'm interested in here is at the bottom there, you know, where it says we're going to leverage government funding to prioritize and procure Canadian-built vehicles. I'm quite interested in that because, like, famously, on the Canadian side, they only build, I can't remember the exact number, but it's not very many models. It's like, is it like 30 or something? It's a pretty small number of models. The majority of them are built in Mexico and the US. So that would, I mean, I don't know if that's going to be like a communist country where, like, you know, there's only like one kind of car you can drive or something. But it's quite a funny idea.
I think in Cuba they still make the 1957 Chevy Chevy Bel Air, and in Mexico they're still making the Volkswagen Bug. And again, there are no Canadian auto manufacturers. The part that you have to recognize, it's Ford, General Motors, and Canada accounts for 1.7% of auto manufacturing in the world. It's a very small portion. I mean, it's big for us, but it's very, very small. The Chinese and the Americans make most of the cars, and the Germans and that. Canada's contribution to the auto market is very small. And where, like Scott Moe says out of Saskatchewan, where's the help for the Saskatchewan farmers when it's all about protecting the auto markets and not much for Saskatchewan farmers? Anyway, I think somebody should remind them, though, that there is no Canadian automaker. Bricklin was a Canadian automaker. I think they folded up in the 70s. Maybe they're going to revive it.
The thing about the Saskatchewan farmers, their great mistake in life, in their strategy, is that they haven't multiplied themselves by 100. Because if they did that, then they would represent many, many ridings, and everybody would rush to try and give them what they wanted. But as it happens, Saskatchewan is like, what's it, like 10 seats or something? 10 MP? I can't remember the exact number, but not many. Whereas Ontario is 100 and something. So there you go. Bob's your uncle. That's the one that matters.
There you go. Pierre Poilievre also out there with the candy for seniors. This is a one that I said we should be doing a long time ago. It doesn't go as far as I would go. I said no tax for CPP and OAS. He's basically raising the tax-free break to $34,000. That's about $10,000 more than now. And allow seniors to keep the option to keep their savings growing in the RSPs until 73. You don't have to collapse it at 71. And protect OAS, GIS, and CPP by keeping the retirement age at 65. Excuse me.
Yeah, that is pretty good bribe, that, isn't it? Because that's the demographic that he performs worst with.
Yeah.
So and it's also an extremely important demographic because they tend to vote more consistently, and there's also a lot of them, a lot of boomers knocking around. So I mean, I mean, this is just pure politics, isn't it? Like cynical
I mean,
politics, I think, and they've tried to make it seem like a conservative sort of policy because it's related to work, but it's
I
just an
would
attempt to win votes, really.
I would go further and say no tax on CPP or OAS and GIS. I'd say zero tax because I mean people work their whole lives for that, and why do they got to continue to pay tax? And a lot of that gets clawed back. So if you manage to squirrel away any money, and you have to collapse your RRSP into a RIF, so there you
That's
go.
kind of just that is life in Canada and many other countries, isn't it? You work, earn income, get taxed on it. Try and buy something, get taxed on it. Try and sell it, get taxed on it. You're constantly being taxed on things you've already been taxed on. So
Yeah, so they
that's
can take
I mean, it's a philosophical thing, really, isn't it? Maybe we should change the philosophy.
Yeah, they take all the taxes, like, like for Canadians, a lot of them are paying over half of their money in taxes, over half, and then they sprinkle some crumbs back to certain people and then tell you how great they are.
Yeah, I mean, there lies power, really. Take money off people and then give it to some of them, and you're the great, powerful, beneficent lord.
And then this is the story that we were talking about earlier. I think we got a clip here to play too. This is David Jacobs saying the secret to Carney's business success is don't pay taxes. This is another Brookfield thing. This Brookfield seems to be, there's so much stuff. If anybody wants to go do a search on Brookfield, you're going to see where they cheat on their carbon credits and now taxes and all kinds of stuff. Brookfield, not exactly an exemplary company. And then guess who was running that thing? Who was running that? You take a guess.
Yeah, our beloved Prime Minister. But there's something very important that you've not mentioned, which is that any uh, anything bad that was done here is an instantly forgiven because it was a green fund or
Right.
two green funds. So they were saving the planet. You might have to dodge tax now and then if you're going to save the planet, Jim. Like,
There
be
you go.
realistic.
We got that clip there, Rommel, to play. I think Ian sent you a clip there that we can play. There you go. We got this clip here.
Conservatives abandoned our armed forces.
I don't think that was the clip. That's there's the one that Ian sent you. But we do have that Carney's Green Fund used Bermuda tax havens to attract investors. The Liberal Party. I think he's got that clip now, or is that the same clip? There we go.
I think the important thing, Tom, is that the flow through of the funds go to Canadian entities who then pay the taxes appropriately, as opposed to taxes being paid multiple times before they get there. So that's how we have the structure. That's the structure that all of our pension funds, par exemple, the Caisse de dépôt, or Ontario teachers, or OMERS, municipal employees, or all the big pension funds in Canada, which are very successful, which protect union workers in many cases. I'm speaking of union workers today, and supply to them.
Yeah.
That really makes me laugh.
Talk about.
There's something so they share the same soul, I think, lawyers and people in finance. There's something so similar the way that they speak about things. Like an obvious example of tax dodging. It's not only is it tax dodging, but it's dodgy. It's ethically, morally dodgy. And then he comes out with this like word salad, which doesn't even make sense on its own terms. He's trying to bamboozle people and hope that they don't understand the meaning of the words that he uses. But
Do you think?
I mean, it's the flow through, isn't it? It's the flow through. That's what matters.
Do you think the regular Joe Canadian could do that when CRA was pressing them for some answers and just go into this word salad and think they'd get away with it?
Just say, look, I just don't want it to be taxed multiple times, CRA. I need the flow through to come, and then it's going to benefit Canadian entities like myself.
And it benefits all of you because at the end of the day, what benefits me benefits him.
It's just the classic, like it's like we're in the Middle Ages, and the Duke of Edmonton here is being attacked and being accused of hypocrisy. And the reality is the Duke of Edmonton doesn't believe, and rightly doesn't believe, that the aristocracy should have to obey the same rules as the plebs. That's essentially what it is. You could easily transfer this to like 1350
But
or something like that in England.
well, I do watch him in his press conferences, and what I do notice is like he has a similar tactic to Donald Trump, where Donald Trump is like mean when he attacks the reporters. Carney is just shames them. He calls them by name and says, "You should know better." And why are you asking this question? Just like he makes them seem like they're so dumb they should never ask that question. And it's just like
Yeah.
there's no respect, especially, and it's a lot of female reporters that he's very disrespectful to. He's very
It is definitely
condescending.
an attempt to like impugn their intelligence and their judgment, which is a shame that he does that when he can't even get people's names right. He can't even get like university names right, as he did yesterday, where he just
Yeah.
got something completely wrong. And then he comes out with a word salad that, you know, with a verbal IQ of about 75. I mean, it's a little bit tragic that this is the guy implying that someone else is stupid.
I mean, some of the reporters in the U.S., like CNN's Caitlin Collins, I mean, I don't think he would do very well with Caitlin Collins if she was actually going after him and not supporting him. But because
Yeah, well, that's not the culture in Canada, is it? So he kind of gets away with it. But if he were to be really roasted and really sort of like put under the microscope, yeah, I think he would have a really hard time.
And then we've got this clip here where he's actually blaming the state of the military on Stephen Harper. So we're going to play this clip for you.
Abandon our armed forces and shamefully abandon our veterans.
Why are we still fighting against certain veterans groups in court? Because they are asking for more than we are able to give right now.
And shamefully abandon our veterans.
They are asking for more than we are able to give right now.
I was prepared to be killed in action. What I wasn't prepared for, Mr. Prime Minister, is Canada turning its back on me.
There you go.
Yeah, it's that's one of the gaffes of all time, that isn't it? Justin Trudeau. I mean, the biggest challenges are his own gaffes, really. He's kind of in a league of his own for gaffes, Justin Trudeau. But
Yeah.
yeah, it is unfortunate that Mark Carney has started to he's taken on that mantle a bit, hasn't he? And he's now coming out with really disingenuous comments like we highlighted yesterday, like that Justin Trudeau's government doubled spending on defense. I mean, that is such a dishonest way to phrase it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the F-35s that Harper was purchased, and then Justin Trudeau came in and said that absolutely not, and then he said never purchased those in 2015 when he won the election. And then in 2023, when there was no other alternatives, he finally said, you know, like that was like almost 10 years later, right? And he said, finally, he said, yes, we'll purchase them, and we still haven't got any deliveries, and now they're talking about canceling them. So yeah, so I mean, the state of our military is underfunded, undermanned, and under-equipped. I think that's the way to look at it. Underfunded, undermanned, and under-equipped. I think that would be the slogan underneath the Canadian military, and underneath that would be Justin Trudeau's thing there. You're asking for more than we're prepared to give. That
Well,
should be
and
our
I would adapt that and say the Liberal government and Mark Carney are asking for more than the military can give as well, because they're sort of like they're writing checks that the military can't cash. They're asserting sovereignty over all of the Arctic, and also insisting that the waterways up there belong to Canada, that they're internal waters and all the rest of it. And yet they won't provide the actual material that you need to back up that kind of a claim. So I mean, that's almost even worse, I think, that kind of like inversion of what Trudeau just said there. Oh, well, back then, I should say.
And we talk about a lot, underpaid, like, you know, like less than $40,000 when you start out in the military. Bureaucrats making almost double and triple that, and getting to work from home. So again, that line that I would use for our military if I was writing a headline: undermanned, under-equipped, underfunded, and with Justin Trudeau's a little second sentence underneath it there, they're asking for more than we're prepared to give. Signed, the Liberal government.
Yeah,
There you
I
go.
mean, it's also kind of, it's about like, it's not just about willingness to give or not give. It's also like what is actually physically possible. And it's not physically possible for the military to do what it's being asked to do now. I mean, in many ways, that's worse, because it's like the military relies on the government to give it the equipment to do certain things, you know, and they're not giving it that. They're not providing it.
And then we got this clip here. So we got a lot of Mark Carney. We got a little clip here from Pierre Poilievre's rally in Steeltown, Hamilton there. That's a good one. There you go. It was a big crowd, but the polls say otherwise. So there you go. That was in Steeltown. Quite a few unions coming out endorsing Pierre Poilievre, and not the NDP for some strange reason.
Yeah, what was it yesterday? The boiler makers or something like that. He was pleased as punch yesterday when he was talking about it. I was giggling away. He couldn't contain his joy. But that's not only happening in Canada, that realignment. You also see in the US where Trump has been endorsed by loads of unions, like crazy amount of unions, and yet historically that was always the Democrats that won those endorsements. But the reality is that the parties are kind of realigning and changing, and that is happening that's happening in Canada too.
And the Bloc had enough of the Liberals as well. Liberals are outraged after the Bloc candidate says that they are worse than Trump and that they're more dangerous than Trump. So Stephen Guilbeault is absolutely outraged.
Why does he always look like he's just been on a hike up a mountain?
And why is he always outraged? I guess is the other question. Like I've never seen him not outraged, right? Like that's his kind of a mantra is like, I'm outraged. Like it sounds like him and Greta. They do that same thing. What was her line? How dare you?
How dare you? How dare you? Yeah.
So there we got
Guilbeault was a protester, wasn't he? He was a jumpsuit wearing Greenpeace protester. So I suppose he's directed that energy now into the government business.
Liberals not making many friends with the NDP or the Bloc at this point. Basically, the leader of the Bloc, Blanchette, calling out the Liberals for refusing to even come for a debate. And Pierre Poilievre, we talked about it yesterday, saying that he was willing to pay for it if they didn't have enough shekels to do it. And TV pundit here, former NDP leader Tom McClare tells Canadians not to vote for the NDP. He says you got to either vote for the Liberals or the Conservatives, and I imagine like most NDPs would vote for the Liberals. So I'm not sure. He's trying to couch that by saying he's asking the NDP to get out of the way, take a knee.
I would say as well that the NDP is not the third party. The third party is the Bloc Québécois, yes. Lest we forget. But yeah, I mean, obviously, that's basically the reason that Mark Carney is ahead in the polls, or the Liberals are ahead in the polls. It's because they've feasted upon the NDP's usual voter base. They're moving over to the Liberals, aren't they, in pretty big numbers?
I almost think that in my mind right now, the party that's going to be the whatever the difference maker is going to be the Bloc. I think the NDP are, Jagmeet's numbers are in the proverbial loo, and I think that the Bloc is probably going to pick up something, and then that's not good for the Liberals either, because they do take a lot of seats in Quebec.
Yeah, they're primary rivals, aren't they? That is the main rivalry in Quebec, is between those two. But I mean, the question then though is if they do become the kind of kingmaker in this election, what is going to be their request? What's going to be the pound of flesh that they demand from Ottawa?
Well, we know what it is usually from Quebec. It's give me all your money and stop talking to us.
But they already have that though. What's the new demand?
I guess more money. I don't know.
Yeah, double it.
We shall see. But it sounds like that they are. Lots of times, I haven't paid a lot of attention to Blanchette, but lately, he seems to be making more sense than the NDP for sure.
Well, he also yesterday came out and said once again that there's not going to be a pipeline, Energy East. I can't remember exactly how he said it. He said it in French as well, obviously. But it was something like, we're not going to have a pipeline along the lines of the Energy East pipeline. That's just not socially acceptable. They love that little phrase, don't they? But he's saying that's not going to happen. So, I mean, in that case, if either Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre needs him to to have a government, how are they going to square that with their promises to build pipelines? Because they've both promised that, both Carney and Poilievre. So I mean, that would be an immediate sellout, wouldn't it, if they had to ditch that to get the backing of Blanchet?
Well, Jagmeet Singh has come out and says that he acknowledges that the NDP faces massive challenges, but he won't back down. That's been his line forever too. I won't back down, and I think that is Jagmeet Singh always. I won't back down, and I think Mark Carney, the first thing he always says is like first a couple of things, first thing, and then he never says the second or third thing. He always just says a couple of things, first thing, and then goes into this long word salad. But and you forget that there was a second or third thing. What's that?
Yeah, his new phrase, though, let's acknowledge his new phrase is something along the lines of, "We have to do things we never thought we'd do before, and we have to do them at speeds we didn't think were possible." So there you go.
There you go.
That's philosophy, isn't it?
It's great. We got another clip here to play from. This is a thing that's been ongoing in the media, talking about Pierre Poilievre security clearance. A lot of the media making a big deal out of it. But Tom McClare, actually a former NDP leader, has come out in defense of Pierre, and it's a pretty good clip here. So maybe they should just play this over and over for the media that continues to attack him and a lot of the people that shriek about him refusing to get his security clearance. Here you go. Play this clip.
Your thoughts, Tom, on the impact of that and the nature of it, the question swirling. What do you make of it?
Well, I think that Pierre Poilievre is right now, and he has always been right when he has refused these so-called security briefings because it would require him to say that he wouldn't do his job. The leader of the official opposition, His Majesty's loyal opposition, has a job under our Constitution to hold the government to account. And it's not true that because somebody in the security apparatus says, well, if you want this information, you're going to have to promise never to use it, that means that a leader of the opposition is being irresponsible if he doesn't take the bait. I would never have accepted to do that. When there were serious security issues, you know what used to happen? Stephen Harper, respecting constitutional convention, would call me. His staff would set it up, and once I was at a wedding, and they tracked me down because he wanted to share with me some important information that he knew would be in the news in the next couple of days, and he wanted me to have it. And it's a clear understanding that in your role, when you're being shared information like that by the Prime Minister, you're going to hold on to it. You're not going to go and blab it at a press conference. So I do think that this is a bit of a mugs game that they're playing right now with Poilievre.
There you go. Maybe the media should play the other media's clip and get an understanding, because that's what Pierre has kind of like articulated many times, but it seems to be a story that doesn't go away, and the Liberals use it over and over and over to gaslight Canadians.
They're trying to use it to kind of like question his sort of how responsible he is, but also that increasingly seem to want to use it to question his sort of patriotism. It almost seems like, but I mean, it is a peculiar one. But then on the other hand, Jagmeet Singh and Blanchet, they've both got it, and I mean, just yesterday, Blanchet came out and said, like, I've never been muzzled. Like, I'll always criticize, you know, the Liberals and all the rest of it, but I don't know. It's one of those things that's almost like it's quite a technical thing, isn't it? It's quite a technical issue, and it's been oversimplified, I feel, by both sides, and they're trying to use it. Well, the Liberals are trying to use it to their advantage. I think the Conservatives just wish that it went away. And
bam, again, Brookfield Asset Management seems to be just stepping into cow pie after cow pie. And it says, Dan McTeague putting out this tweet here that Mark Carney and his Brookfield Asset Management might be facing antitrust investigations south of the border. And we're going to play a small clip of this. You can go and find it online if you want to play the whole clip, but you can find this online. This is all this Net Zero Climate Alliance and all this stuff. And we've seen that on his website too, where he says he will mandate the banks back into this carbon-based output pricing model. So go ahead and play this clip here.
Notably, the climate cartel did so at ExxonMobil in 2021, replacing 3 directors with members of its own choosing. The climate cartel's commitment and demands reduce output and raise prices for American consumers. There's no way to reach, quote, net zero without reducing production and diminishing the American standard of living. These negative impacts are especially pronounced in the fossil fuel, aviation, and agricultural sectors. In other words, the very industries that allow Americans to drive, fly, and eat. For example, the climate cartel has said that fossil fuels must, quote, stay in the ground to reduce carbon emissions. Similarly, the climate cartel has called for reducing the number of airplane flights by 12% and capping passenger air travel to 2019 levels. Likewise, the climate cartel has called for cutting American.
There you go. That kind of like ties into Karina Gold, a Liberal MP that said we need to landlock Alberta's resources.
I mean, that guy there, well, that guy, I mean, he's quite sort of famous congressman, isn't he? That chap, Thomas Massey, isn't it? Anyway, what he mentioned there was, these, emissions basically are the things that we need to do to eat and all the rest of it and have an economy. What's also interesting, though, particularly when you look at Mark Carney and his promises, is you have to emit quite a lot of CO2, In other words, you have to manufacture things and have an industry if you want to have a military. That's also pretty important, isn't it? We can't just buy all of our military equipment from other countries. We're going to have to build some of it ourselves. So again, it's like, how is this going to be squared? How are we going to? How is Mark Carney going to make sense of this when he needs to build? We also apparently need independence. That includes economic independence, military independence. That all requires that we emit carbon dioxide. So how's that going to work?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anybody does unless they use carbon. Again, the big stuff that, one of the other things that maybe they should look at is the map, find the map and the map of the world and locate Canada, the second largest landmass in the world, and ask yourself how we get goods from one port to the other side of the country, or how we ship goods from our two major ports, and then other than with diesel. It'd be a good question for somebody to ask.
Well, and also, since we decided in the last century that we were going to offshore all of our manufacturing to places like China, we should also look at what it is the Chinese do when they make the stuff that we use. What kind of carbon emissions are they letting out into the world? Turns out the most on Earth, and they're using coal to do it, and like pretty bad sort of environmental standards in China, at least compared to Canada. But that's still our manufacturing in a way. At least they manufacture goods that we use. It's just it happens over the sea, and then it's brought to us. I mean, it just none of it really adds up. To be honest, we could go on for a while, couldn't we?
The United States is going all in on LNG, and it's selling it to everybody. And it's one of the cheapest forms of energy out there right now. The cheapest. It's like it equates to like I can't remember like the numbers, like $20 a barrel in U.S. oil. It's very, very cheap compared to oil. And Justin Trudeau said that when the Japanese and the Germans and the Koreans came begging for our LNG, that there was no business case for it.
Yeah, we're talking about his long list of gaffes. That's got to be up there, hasn't it? That's maybe like top 10, I would say.
And then talking about LNG and oil and gas, here we got Danielle Smith. She's all fired up.
Are they for real? Do they really think that Justin Trudeau was the one out there advocating on behalf of the energy industry in the United States? The guy who imposed the No More Pipelines bill, the tanker ban, an emissions cap on oil, an emissions cap on methane, net zero power regs, net zero vehicles, net zero building construction? Mr. Speaker, those are all policies advanced by the NDP. It's the Liberal NDP coalition that is damaging this province, damaging our industry, and I'm the one standing up for it.
She on fire.
Yeah, very animated. But she's just channeling, like we talk about it every day, don't we? She's channeling that fury that's felt in Alberta and sort of a lot of people in the West, I would say.
Why would Alberta be
natural resources?
Why would Alberta be angry? What would they have to be angry about?
Yeah, I mean, they get to provide money for Quebec. I mean, that's a real privilege. There's not just anybody that can do that. But they're granted that honor to pay for a province that despises them. I mean, come on.
Again, for Canadians, this is a little thing that you can tuck in the back of your pocket there to bring out. Alberta Oil and Gas, the #1 by far biggest contributor to Canada's GDP. And that's even at its suppressed. You just think if they could actually get some pipelines, east and west, and the Northern Gateway. Just think what it could do then. We could have a sovereign wealth fund like the Albertans have a sovereign wealth fund, and yet we have policies that suppress our greatest natural wealth. Doesn't make a lot of sense.
And
No
also
wonder why
our
she's
biggest
fired
leverage
up.
in the world, our biggest card that we have in this game of Monopoly is that. That's the thing that we can send to the world. That's the thing that we can theoretically deny the Americans to, in retaliation for what they're up to. That's the power, isn't it? And yet that's the thing that is also restricted all the time.
And they keep saying that we need to, do all these climate things because the Europeans are doing it. But wasn't it the Europeans that were here begging for our LNG and our oil and gas? Wasn't it them that were begging for our energy? And we're saying, no, we don't want to give it to you because we want to be, I don't know what we want to be. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, also, isn't it still the Europeans that have found themselves in hell, basically, because they decided to get rid of their own energy production and buy Russian oil and gas instead, and Saudi and oil or whatever. They decided to look to the world to provide their energy. Then a war broke out, and all of a sudden that was cut off. Well, they decided to cut it off, but in that scenario, the Europeans were then. That's why they came over the Atlantic and begged Canada, because they were so stupid. They were so myopic in their pursuit of these net zero aims or whatever, that they sabotaged their own energy system. They became energy dependent on foreign countries, and then suddenly that energy was unavailable. And then they would just, and still now the aftershock remains. They're flailing around like panicking children. They don't know what to do. They're still panicking, and now they're panicking about the military because that's something else that they decided to let somebody else take care of. So I mean, the Europeans. This is something I feel, just to go off topic slightly, but I feel like Mark Carney maybe is not aware that there are people that hear Europe and they think of that. When he comes constantly and refers to Europe as though Europe can teach us anything. Europe cannot teach us a thing. They've failed in almost every way. Everything that they've pursued over the last 30 years has ended in failure. So why should we look at them as a sort of standard to imitate?
Let's go to markets. Gold, our friend gold here, over the $3,000 mark, hanging on to it. It looks like it's going to chop there for a bit. Hanging on to 3,000 in over 4,300 in Canadian dollars, I believe. And I did post it on my LinkedIn. If you can go find my LinkedIn, you can go read it. Canada, again, on the list as the standout. The only nation in the G20 without any gold reserves. The only nation in the G20 without any gold reserves. Zero. We had 1,000 metric tons of gold back in 1965. Sold most of it off around the price of $300 an ounce. Now it's 3,000, 10 times more in US dollars. And guess what our number one reserve asset is? Can you take a guess?
You got me. I can't possibly think.
US dollars. $67 billion in US. The same currency that the liberals want to basically say they're starting a war with, economic war, even more. I think Chrystia Freeland said tanks are rolling in. So we don't. Not only do we not have gold in our central bank reserves, we actually have the currency of the country that they say we're going to go to war with. Like, that seems ridiculous, doesn't it?
Also, the country that has the most gold reserves. It's a nice little circle.
Nice little circle, yeah. Crypto, Bitcoin. Looks like it wants to challenge. GameStop came out today. GameStop says that they want to add Bitcoin to its cash reserves. So they want to diversify, kind of like MicroStrategy. So there you go, Bitcoin. Getting some fun from the number one meme stock out there, right? Who doesn't want to own a meme stock?
We remember it fondly, don't we?
That's right. Who doesn't want to own a meme stock? Apparently, everybody. The Canadian dollar, 70 cents. I haven't seen that for a little while. Looks like it's trending up. I think it's believing the election will be positive. We'll see, right? Canadian dollar foretells a lot of things, right? So let's watch the Canadian dollar and see how it speaks. Again, if we get If we get a government that favors our natural resources and lets us use them for the benefit of Canadians, that dollar will spring very much to the upside. On our AI and tech section, a lot of people saying this, you and I have said it as well. AI, this one is Grok, replaced Google for him, but a lot of people using OpenAI or Grok or several of these LLMs out there. I don't hear too much of Llama, the Facebook one. I haven't really used it much, but I rarely use Google these days.
Yeah, I mean, why would you? It's just so it's been so limited for so long because of its like the way that it sponsors results and all the rest of it, and also just removes them for certain reasons. I mean, it's just not really up to the job anymore.
Yeah, and in OpenAI, I tested it out this morning. It's actually pretty good. You know, one of the things when you create an image in OpenAI, usually it can't spell worth the hot damn, right? But this next version of it, and we got a little surprise for you near the end here. With OpenAI, I created an image, an actual meme, but it now does text. Look at that. So it actually learned how to spell.
Yeah, it's miraculous.
You know, and now it's smarter than most Canadians or most people on this planet because they can actually spell. There you go. I don't know why this thing got stuck in here somehow, but Beijing calls on for more trade with Canada as the U.S. trade war. Well, maybe take off the tariffs on the canola. But
yeah, I mean that's an interesting article to read. It's a Canadian Press article. It goes into a bit more detail, and the Chinese kind of, yeah, they say this, but they're not actually doing anything to try and make it happen. And as usual with the Chinese, it's basically like they're saying that Canada has to come and beg, really, if you read between the lines, as to how the Canadians have got to go to Beijing and kowtow, to the emperor himself. And the reality is, obviously, the Canadians are never going to do that in 1,000 years. So this is all just wasted energy, I'd say.
I believe there's a story, I think Pierre Poilievre was saying that, again, BAM got some money from the Chinese, too. There you go.
Yeah, he has, and he claims that he's beholden to China. Actually, went a step further, didn't he? Said Carney is basically indebted to the Chinese.
We haven't heard much of the tariff talks, and some people are saying that Chrystia Freeland there, because she's now the transport minister, ramps up the rhetoric with Tesla so that she can get a reaction. So because it has been their secret weapon, right? Poke the bear there, and then they use that to drive some hate, division, and fear. And so she's coming out and says she's freezing Tesla's rebate payments, just like sounds like she's freezing Russian assets. So she's now freezing Tesla rebate payments and excluding the company from future programs. Wow. Do you know that? I don't think the Canadian government realizes that Elon Musk runs 4 of the leading technology companies in the world. So Canada can do without those companies, I guess. You know, we don't need, satellites and all that, Neuralink and all. Like, it's just like the best EVs in the world. So I thought climate emergency was the #1 thing, but apparently not. So again, she said 10 years that the Liberal government wasted virtue signaling and identity politics. What is this if not that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the most popular electric vehicle or most popular manufacturer of electric vehicles in Canada, and now it's suddenly excluded. I mean, the rebate anyway had already ended, hadn't it? So
yeah, the rebate doesn't exist anyway, but freezing their rebate payments again, I guess, hey, the Liberals love a good mandate and they love to freeze things, right? So there you go.
Yeah, it's
she's the queen of the freeze.
That Batman character.
If she is anything, she is the queen of the freeze. So she would be the ice queen, right? Freezing bank accounts, now freezing Tesla payments. If we had to give her a nickname, we would call her the queen of the freeze.
She's freezing emissions reductions as well, by the sounds of it, because people are just going to buy gas cars if they can't get their beloved Tesla.
There you go. She's the queen of the freeze. Anyway, and then again, CTV doing the work for somebody here saying customers now call out WestJet to end that contract with Starlink. Which customer would be calling it out when you're on the plane there and say, I wish I had internet off? I'm not using that Starlink. No, no.
I think
I'd
it was
rather
probably
not.
Chrystia Freeland who called them out there as the passenger.
Do you know what I mean? Like one customer screams for it, and they're just like, I think most people would rather have the convenience of the internet. Instead of investing in Canada's a couple of companies that Mark Carney is friendly with, I think it's Telesat, that doesn't really have any satellites in the air, versus Starlink that is providing internet to most of the world now. But
I would say, though, there is definitely logic to having your own satellite system now, especially since the Americans have decided to go off on their own path and not bring the rest of the world with them. I mean,
that would take
it would be nice if we had our own, wouldn't it?
It would take huge investment, something that we don't seem to do well with. Let's take a look at Northvolt, the battery EV plant that was the government's chipped in like close to over $3 billion, and it's bankrupt.
Yeah, but I mean, I would say the pressure is greater than it's ever been, really, now, isn't it? To try and be independent of the United States.
Well,
and it does mean that these things that have all failed, something's going to have to happen to make them work. We're going to have to up our game.
Yeah, we got a long ways to go. And it doesn't start with virtue signaling, because all they're doing is hurting the consumer, because there's a lot of people that want to drive Teslas for a reason, because, you know, they're really good. And to do this, it just seems to be hurting the consumer and allows them to virtue signal and drives more hate. Tesla just confirmed robotaxi coming to Austin, Texas. There you go. So we won't get those either. I guess we'll freeze those. Freeze everything.
Well, Chrystia Freeland has absolutely no idea why anybody would want one of these things, because she has a chauffeur. She uses a human. She doesn't understand the need for a robot to do it.
She said that. She famously said that. She doesn't even need a car. She doesn't understand why Canadians need a car. She lives in Ottawa in a you know, like a I think, you know, an expensive condo, or I don't know where she lives, but she gets a chauffeur-driven limousine. She gets airfare everywhere around the world. And some of the Canadian diplomats and MPs and that spend lots of money on booze and airfare. Anyway, here's our meme that our friend ChatGPT cooked up for us. This is his first one. I just said, do a meme on a top story out there in the world right now, and create a meme, and it did this one for me. When you accidentally add a journalist to top secret group chat, but you tell the president it's the only glitch in 2 months. There you go.
I mean, it's an effort. At least it's like you say. At least they managed to spell everything right. But that's about, you don't put a full stop in a meme like that. Not in that meme format. You got to learn that, Mr. AI.
Yeah, like I have Starlink on my house, and I've had it for a couple of years now. It's amazing, and I have it in town here. And Brett is a regular viewer, says that it's invaluable in the north. And I worked in a mine site as a controller, and I can't remember the name of the company now. We had some satellite company that was actually we're getting internet from. And it was so bad, like on a light cloudy day, we had 100 people on site, 150 sometimes on site. And you couldn't get anywhere, right? Started with a G, I can't remember the name of it. We finally had to pay Manitoba whatever it's called, Manitoba Telecom or something like that. Large sums of money to kind of put a dish on their satellite to do a line of sight shot to the mine site to get us a decent internet connection. But Starlink has solved a lot of that, including even for the Ukrainians and everything. Starlink is you know, in emergency situations, it came to the rescue in Los Angeles, came to the rescue in the hurricane there, and Starlink providing internet in many, many places. And here's the Canadian government again against Starlink and Tesla. These technologies are changing the world.
And they are absolutely dominant as well, Starlink, aren't they? It's not like you can just go to a rival. They kind of own that market, don't they?
Well, SpaceX, I think it's by a factor of 10 launches more rockets into space than everybody else combined. They are a U.S. military contractor too, so it is controlled a lot by the U.S. military. But that's how they get all those satellites in space with SpaceX. Babylon B, our friend in the meme world here, right? Man wishes there was a radical progressive journalist nearby to tell him whether this post was misinformation or not. There you go.
That sort of takes us back to the beginning, doesn't it? That's nice symmetry. It goes back to when we talk about the experts and COVID and all the rest of it and all the things that they got wrong.
Like we talked about it several times about there's a website that people go to and who to be angry at today, like who to hate and who to do this to, And if we look at our next meme here from the Babylon Bee, it's definitely Tesla has been the one of it's been winning that race right now. And it says Democrats estimate they're only one more arson away from being popular again. I think their party is on fire more than Teslas are on fire. Like the Democrats have lost their way, as I do believe the liberals are basically the mirror image of them up here.
You got to remember though, that worked for them in 2020, didn't it? Worked for them very well indeed.
Yeah. And Clem is going to take our Queen of the Freeze and get it out there on the internet and work it. There you go, Clem. You take that and get it out there. Elbows up. Be careful if you're a Liberal MP that you might get the elbow in your own face. So they definitely don't take prisoners. Speaking of that, we talk about prisoners. It sounds like there's a little bit more activity in the Russia-Ukraine war than they might be talking about a ceasefire in the Black Sea area. So they go along with when they were talking about they weren't going to tackle any of those. So this is kind of like stepping slowly. Because they were supposed to be not attacking infrastructure on either side anymore, and now they're talking about maybe not in the Black Sea. Why don't they just get cut to the chase and just stop killing each other?
Well, the Russians are being they're being very difficult here, and on this one, as with everything else, but on this one they've said they want sanctions lifted in exchange for a ceasefire in the Black Sea. But I just think they're playing silly buggers. The Russians, they haven't really had much to brag about in the Black Sea since the beginning of this war, when the Ukrainians sank most of their ships.
I believe that like that's probably where that deal's going to go. I mean, from what I hear out there, it looks like the Russians want their economy opened up again, and that's going to be the key to getting a ceasefire and maybe even some land back and stuff like that. So, because they want, there's a lot of Russian assets frozen. And I think a lot of the European nations, I think they were going to use that money, because it's all just frozen. Like the Queen of the Freeze says, it's just frozen. Haven't taken it yet. So all those people that are driving around in those oligarchs' yachts might have to give them back. Anyway.
Yeah. Maybe the Europeans should use it to build a military. That would be good, wouldn't it?
There you go. They could probably, with some of those super yachts, they could probably do, well, most of them are probably made out of plastic. Anyway, that's been our show today. Lots on the election, and we'll be here. We've got Renee Merrifield in at 3 o'clock today to talk about what's going on in the political world, the former MLA. And then special guest today, we've interviewed him a few times, Mario Canseco, the pollster. And he's going to tell us if those polls are full of malarkey or if they're actually reflecting a truth out there. It'll be interesting to see where he puts Jagmeet Singh and the Liberals and the Conservatives and the Bloc for that matter. So that's at noon, I believe. So
yeah, he's always interesting. I would recommend people listen to him.
And we're going to see if we can get the Conservative candidate in the riding that Mark Carney's running in. There you go. What's wrong?
An European chap. Oh, it's the woman, isn't it? Yeah.
It's the woman, yeah.
Whatever.
We'd also like to get Mark Carney himself, and then we can play the first part of his clip for him. But I'd be interested. Anyway, we do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.